Hello, everyone. Welcome to Factual. This is a different sort of show than my normal weekday morning show, which is a bit more chill, and this month, considerably more science-y. On this show, we talk about topics pertaining to intersex people, trans people, law, science, culture, all sorts of things like that. We're doing a special show today that I hadn't scheduled prior to this morning, because someone shared with me a very interesting news article. And I wanted to bring it up here and discuss some of the implications. So here we go. This is from The Guardian, Australia edition, I suppose. And it reads Victoria, the state of Victoria. For those of you in the US, Australia has states. Weird, I know, right? The state of Victoria, which is in the southeast corner of Australia, could become the first Australian state to ban unnecessary surgery on intersex children. This is noteworthy because while there have been campaigns to do this for a very long time at this point, very few places have actually done it. And for some very strange reasons, but we'll get into that a little bit later. So what this is talking about is, in case you're unaware, being born with an intersex condition is relatively common. It's not super common, but it's not super rare either. Most studies indicate approximately 1.7% of live births are intersex, although not all present with obvious indicators at time of birth. When a child is born with obvious intersex conditions, there's a tendency to correct them. And this can lead to a whole lot of damage. The justification is to normalize the person's anatomy so that they won't be treated like a freak as they go through childhood. But of course, no one should be looking at a child's genitals in childhood. Intersex people who've grown up have reported difficulties due to those kinds of normalization surgeries, which are not medically necessary. And so Victoria is doing something about it. So Victoria will become the first Australian state to ban unnecessary surgeries on intersex children, with legislation to be introduced to Parliament to ensure procedures are deferred until patients are old enough to consent to them. I realize consent is a weird word for people listening in the United States. It's a thing that here in the US, we don't know what it means anymore. It's illegal to use that term anymore. But to put it in words that are okay for the US internet, it means a person agrees to what is done to them. It's part of the concept of bodily autonomy. Health Minister Marianne Thomas will on Tuesday introduce the Health Safeguards for People Born with Variations in Sex Characteristics bill, which, if passed, would prohibit deferrable, irreversible procedures and treatments on intersex infants and children until they can provide informed consent. Intersex people are born with variations in sex characteristics, such as reproductive organs, chromosomes, or hormones that do not fit typical definitions of male or female. Thomas said the reform, first committed in 2021, gives intersex people agency over our own bodies. She said it follows instances where people born with variations in sex characteristics have experienced harm and trauma through inappropriate and unnecessary medical interventions. Quote, "Every person deserves the right to make decisions about their own body with respect, dignity, and safety at the heart of the care they receive," Thomas said. Now, again, for my American friends, that means people should have the right to say what happens with their own lives, with their own bodies. I realize that's controversial. That's unorthodox. That's borderline treason to suggest that people should be able to determine their own lives in the freest country that God ever gave man. But it's true. In fact, if you remember back just a year or so, we could do that too once upon a time, at least with most things. But if you're an infant and you're born with mixed sex characteristics, tough luck. Somebody's going to make a decision for you, do a surgery, and fix you. Quote, this is an important step forward for people born with variations in sex characteristics and their families who for too long have not had the fair and proper legal recognition of their rights. That raises an interesting discussion. What is a right if it's not legally recognized? From whence does a right derive its rightness if it is not protected in law? That's a topic for another time, but it is worth talking about. This legislation will not affect urgent interventions needed to save a life or prevent serious harm, but under the changes, all other procedures and treatments would be reviewed by a new independent oversight panel. If the panel recommends treatment, parents must consent on behalf of a child who cannot, while children judged capable of making their own medical decisions can consent themselves. That's an important distinction because it doesn't mean the child has to necessarily reach the age of majority. They just have to be cognitively effective enough that they can convince this panel that they're capable of making their own decisions with regards to what happens to their bodies. And that's a pretty big deal because for so long, in so much of the Western world, the parents got to dictate what happened to the child as if they were property. And when the child comes into their majority and begins to be able to have legal power over their own selves, they have to deal with whatever their parents chose to do to them. And for intersex kids, that can be a big problem. The process is designed to ensure families receive accurate information, understand treatment options, and have access to peer and psychosocial support when making decisions. The need for the reform was underscored by an Equality Australia report released on Monday, which found infants and children were being subjected to irreversible procedures, including clitoral reduction and the removal of healthy gonads for non-medical reasons. The report, compiled from more than 240 documents released by major public hospitals under Freedom of Information laws, was only able to scrutinize 83 cases due to redactions. So we can alter the bodies of infants to force them into this binary that people like to pretend exists, but we can't report on what was done in the medical records. Am I silly, or is this obviously not good? Nearly half of the cases, 47% from Sydney and Brisbane between 2018 and 2023, involved cosmetic preferences, such as making genitals appear more typical. Other non-medical drivers included a desire to align the child with the gender assigned at birth and responding to parental distress or confusion. That's the biggest one at 62.7%. So you might have a situation, for example, where a baby is born with ambiguous genitals or both sets of genitals or something. And the doctors make a decision and assign a sex at birth. But then the parents become distressed and they say, oh no, this can't possibly be. Please, doctor, fix it. And so the doctors correct the situation. But the birth certificate's already been filed. So you have a child who is assigned one sex, but then altered to present as the other and is actually intersex. And they never get a say about any of it. They grow up and have to deal with the consequences. And if the guesses were wrong, then they have to deal with the expense of trying to fix it. I hope you can see how that's a bit of an issue. The report warns such procedures can have long-term consequences, including loss of sexual or reproductive function, urinary tract issues, ongoing or repeat surgeries, and negative self-image. This is true. In fact, in many cases where the urethra has to be relocated as part of these procedures, they have a fairly high failure rate. And in such cases, a child could have to go through over a dozen follow-up surgeries to try to correct what went wrong in the first surgery. And that's assuming nothing goes wrong in any of those. You could condemn a child to being in the hospital under surgery for much of their childhood just because you're afraid their junk looks a little different. It's pretty fucked up. Anna Brown, the chief executive of Equality Australia, said while she was yet to see the bill, she was hopeful it would protect the rights and autonomy of intersex children. Quote, "We have a responsibility to protect children who cannot advocate for themselves, so they are no longer left to bear the physical and psychological scars of medical procedures they never chose." Those of you who've been around a minute might understand why these kinds of issues strike kind of close to my heart. Quote, "Too many intersex people have had to live with the consequences of decisions they had no real part in and that could have waited until they were old enough to have a say." Tony Briffa, an advocate for intersex people in Victoria, said the bill was about safeguarding every person's right to make decisions about their own body. Quote, "Procedures that alter sex characteristics raise profound and deeply personal questions. Questions I wish I had had a chance to answer for myself." Yeah. Dr. Dino, member for 20 months. That's a lot of months. Thanks, Doc. And thanks for stopping by. I can't quite see what flag that is on my screen, but I appreciate it. Thank you, thank you. And hello, everyone. Thanks for joining. I tried to warn people this morning I was doing a bonus show, and I scheduled it in advance, but it doesn't always work out that way, you know? Nonetheless, if you're watching in the future, do all the usual YouTube things, hit the buttons and whatnot. When something is important, I try to do a bonus show about it. This is new news, but it's a topic that's needed addressing for a long time. Quote, "I have spent 25 years fighting to see these reforms make it to Parliament to protect future generations of intersex children in Victoria. The bill brings Victoria in line with the Australian Capital Territory, the only jurisdiction in Australia to have banned non-consensual medical procedures on intersex people. They join a few countries globally, such as Malta, Germany, Greece, Spain, and Portugal, that have similar laws. Notably, not the UK, not the US, not most of the English-speaking world. Curiously enough, it's most peculiar." That's it for that article. But I do have some more. So this is a video that's almost 7 years old. For 7 years, the people in this video have been trying to spread the message about how very necessary these kinds of steps are. And yet, our society has been going in the wrong direction in more than one way, you might say.
When I got my medical records, they were hot. They just came off the photocopy machine. The first page I saw, it said 46XY male pseudohermaphrodite. That was fucking.
So if you're not familiar with intersex conditions, nobody will blame you. They don't get talked about a lot. 46XY means you're genetically male, but phenotypically, if you're a pseudo-hermaphrodite, that means that you've got male-ish, but a bit of both, physically, presentationally speaking. And sometimes that can reflect hormone issues, and sometimes it doesn't. There's a lot to be said about this sort of situation and what causes it and what results from it. But all that mattered at the time of this person, their name is Pigeon, by the way, at Pigeon's birth, is that somebody saw something weird and decided to alter the situation.
Crazy.
Now, it's also worth noting, Pigeon was able to access their medical records. Not all of us are. I've been looking for a little over a year at this point, and I still can't find out exactly what was done to me when I was an infant.
And I started flipping through and seeing other things, like the gonad was abnormal. My clitoral enlargement was 1.5 centimeters. Testicular feminization. This is about the vaginoplasty. The chromosomes are XY. This one talks about when they removed my undescended testes. The narrative they were crafting for my parents was that.
So hold on for a second here. We're talking about a lot of anomalies compared to the binary and some of the procedures that were done as an infant. One of the things that they specifically mentioned was undescended testes. Now, when you hear the people in the US talking about the genital mutilation of children, they're not talking about people like Pigeon or people like me. But they scream so loudly about fertility and sterilization. And yet, they have no problem whatsoever with sterilizing people like Pigeon. But more on that later.
I was like an underdeveloped female child, and that all the procedures they would do would help me develop into a fully developed female child. They didn't want to say that, like, I'm actually intersex, I'm actually not female or male. In this whole stack of paperwork.
Also worth noting, in a lot of states, I believe Pigeon is from California, and I don't know what they do in California, but in a lot of states, you can't put intersex on a birth certificate because there's this binary concept. You have to put M or F. That's the way it was in my state when I was born. Good luck, I suppose.
There's never any mention of what I needed or I wanted. My voice is absent from this entire stack of medical records.
Pigeon Pagonis was 18 when they learned the truth about their medical history.
It was like getting kicked in the stomach and just feeling like your whole life is a lie. It kind of was like that movie.
That's super relatable. I was 44 when I figured out that things were not what they seemed. Oh, I had clues my entire life, to be sure, but I didn't have proof. I didn't know, you know?
Jim.
And it very much does feel like you've been gaslit your entire life. Like, there are some things you can cling on to, like the fact I have children. They're still real, they still exist. But so much of what I thought I knew about my own life was a lie. How do you handle that, you know?
Carrie, I'm not good at remembering movies.
Truman Show?
Yeah, a sex and gender Truman Show. Where, like, I think at some point he realizes these people kind of constructed this narrative for him, and then he's like, holy shit, nothing's real. I didn't understand gender and sex outside of the binary at that point. So my only
a lot of people don't, because our educational systems are deliberately designed to exclude that information, because we have this thing where we like to come up with models and descriptives and maps and stories, and then people get brought up believing those stories, and then they decide the stories are true, and if reality contradicts the story, it's reality that's false. We see this all the time here in the skeptic community, people who believe in all sorts of woo-woo fantasies or supernatural occurrences, MLMs, all sorts of nonsense. People who believe the story is real and reality is not. It's fucking wild. And Jur asks, did you not need your birth certificate for anything before your 40s? I did, actually, quite a lot, for my driver's license, for joining the military, so on and so forth. The birth certificate I had was edited. It has a little mark on it that says it's an amended certificate. They don't tell you what was amended, just, oh, some clerical error that was corrected at some point.
Conclusion at the time was I was a boy, I'm a boy, and they all lied to me. And as I grew up and I learned, it's not that simple. It's not, I wasn't born a boy and I wasn't born a girl. I was born intersex.
Intersex is an umbrella term that covers a range of medical conditions which result in a person.
Now, I realize this is small for a lot of people. In the behind intersex, they're listing off a shit ton of different conditions. Because there's a lot of ways to be intersex. It's, once again, it's any deviation from the binary. Because there isn't a real binary.
Being between the typical definitions of male and female. Some of these conditions result in what doctors call ambiguous genitalia. When this happens, parents decide whether to have their child undergo surgery to normalize their appearance.
Minor point of order. Sometimes parents decide, like we saw with the Victoria article from earlier this week, 62.7% of the time, parental distress is the reason that surgery is considered, or at least the primary reason, but not always. As I've mentioned before, my parents say they knew nothing about what happened to me. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it is possible that parents aren't consulted, that doctors see something they don't like, they make a decision, they make a measurement, they make a guess, whatever the criteria, and then they do a surgery. They don't necessarily consult the parents. But even if they did, that doesn't necessarily make it okay.
What did the doctors tell you when Pigeon was an infant and you noticed some differences?
They needed to do like a vaginal opening, some work on the clitoris because it was larger than like a normal.
Thank you, John. I understand vertical streams are different. I don't understand how they work well completely on the YouTubes, but I appreciate the thought. I don't even know where I would find that information, but I appreciate it nonetheless. So what she's talking about here is that when Pigeon was born, they had an enlarged clitoris. Now, those of you who've been around a little while may recall that there's a measurement device that's used to determine whether the glands counts as a penis or a vagina. This is what is so silly about the bigot brigade, the transphobes, when they say penis or vagina, that's all there is. First of all, they're not the same organ. Penis and clitoris are the analogous organs, and everyone is born with one by whichever name you call it. If you want to say penis, everyone is born with a penis. If you want to say clitoris, everyone is born with a clitoris. The only difference is size. And so they have this measuring device. And if it's above a certain size, it's a penis. Congratulations, you're a boy. If it's under a certain size, oh, you must be a girl. But if it's in between, somebody makes a decision and makes some cuts.
And it would look like she would grow up with like feeling damaged or broken, like a little penis. It would grow. And this would be very bad for her and hard on her mentally, emotionally, psychologically.
So this is what the doctors were telling Pigeon's mom. is that with this in-between semi-phallus thing, if they didn't cut it down and make it resemble a traditional clitoris, then people would make fun of Pigeon. They would ridicule, tease, bully, and Pigeon would feel wrong about their own body. Like maybe they'll make it to 7th or 8th grade or whatever and go through sex ed and then discover that what the teacher's telling them about boys and girls doesn't apply to them and might feel like a freak about it. Now, we don't have counterfactuals. We don't know that that's what would happen because the surgery was done. But the fact that the doctors didn't know that's what would happen either is a problem, because with a lot of these kinds of situations, we can look at statistical data. We can say, you know, this has been the case for 1,000 kids, and in 87% of cases, they feel shame and raw about their body and end up having a procedure later in life. But we don't have that data. Not because no one ever collected it, but because kids have never been allowed to grow up as they are and make their own decision later. I shouldn't say never. There have been a few notable cases, some of which have ended up in the history books, because sometimes some intersex people have gotten up to some very interesting antics. But that's another topic for another time.
How did the surgeries that were done on you as a child affect you now?
The surgeries left me with tons of scar tissue and nerve damage and just complications and really making things difficult in terms of sex and pleasure. My body.
And that's a big issue too, because doing these surgeries on infants creates a few different problems, one of which is the same reason we don't want to do genital surgeries on trans kids, because you need enough tissue to work with. You need to let it develop a bit in order to make sure you do the surgery correctly. On an infant, you have the minimalist amount of tissue to work with. The second is the scars. Scars don't grow like the rest of your tissue. And so you can end up with stretching and tearing or more surgeries to deal with the scars. That can lead to some problems too, as you can imagine, I'm sure. No need for me to get explicit on that one.
Body from like the pelvic area to like here. I think this part of my body still to this day is very foreign to me.
Do you regret choosing surgery for Pigeon?
Oh boy, yes. Yeah, I do. I know I felt what I was doing then was saving my child and doing the right thing. And in all, I was doing more harm than good.
This is very similar in some ways to the argument around circumcision, which is another form of infant genital mutilation that's not medically necessary and is practiced in the Western world. A lot of parents are led to believe, whether by physicians or society or whatever the case may be, that what they're doing is beneficial in the long run, that it'll spare the child from looking weird or suffering a higher risk of infection or whatever the hell else. But it's not true. It's even more not true in the case of intersex kids. In large part because we just don't have the data of what happens when an intersex kid is allowed to grow up with the body they have, because it doesn't happen very often. Most of the intersex conditions that do reach teenagerhood, adulthood, whatever, are of a different kind that don't present so ambiguously. We detect a lot of intersex cases when a child reaches adolescence because a young girl doesn't start her period and doesn't start her period and doesn't start her period. And then finally someone looks and goes, oh, those are testicles. We should, probably do something about that and maybe put you on hormones so that your body can like go through puberty, because surprise, you have androgen insensitivity. For example, it goes the other way too. Sometimes you'll grow up with a female phenotypical body and you'll hit puberty, and all of a sudden your clitoris will turn into a penis and your testicles descend and your vagina closes up, and suddenly you're a boy now because your body does respond to androgens. It just wasn't producing them until you hit puberty. The human body can do many, many remarkable things, and there may be more conditions like these we don't know about because we're doing surgeries to infants, and we never get a chance to find out what would happen if allowed to run their natural course.
Pigeon now identifies as non-binary and uses they/them pronouns. They founded a group called the Intersex Justice Project and are part of a growing movement of activists calling for an end to medically unnecessary surgeries on infants.
So this is the American Urological Association meeting. There are urologists in here with the Society of Pediatric Urology who are content to still do these surgeries. Shame on them not recognizing the harm that they've done to intersex children and adults.
These surgeons have gotten away with these medically unnecessary surgeries for too long. Their time is up. Fix your hearts, not our parts.
Now, it's worth noting that the people doing these surgeries, they aren't evil. They often believe what they're doing really is in the best interest of the child, whether it's for psychological reasons, growing up with a normal body, or for something they've been told about health reasons, or it's just caring for how the parents feel about their baby, because there is still that patriarchal trend within our society of the parents own the child until the child is old enough, or something along those lines. But the fact they haven't updated their thinking, they haven't critically examined what they're doing and why in the service of this binary that doesn't actually exist, is pretty fucked up. John Fabiano asks, I'm trying to remember, Ember. Intersex is about 1% of the population. Depending on who you ask, most studies show about 1.7%. It varies depending on what you count. If you include all intersex conditions, everything, hormones, genetics, gonads, neurology, etc., then it's around 1.7% that we know of. There's still probably more we don't. That's one of the things that I wanted to research before the government stopped funding science here in the US. Maybe someday. It could be as high as 5%. But we don't know because we haven't done the science. Some people would offer lower numbers because they're more restrictive about what they count. You know, only chromosomal anomalies or only anatomical anomalies or whatever the case may be. But definitionally, intersex is when you're between the sexes, however you define them. So a more inclusive definition is often more useful, unless you have a reason that you need to talk about only a specific condition or family of conditions.
Not our parts.
This movement is no longer confined to the streets. The big fight is in state legislatures. The California State Senate passed a resolution in 2018 saying surgeries that aren't medically necessary should be delayed until the child is old enough to consent. But that resolution was non-binding, and activists want enforcement.
Yeah, what good is a resolution that doesn't do anything? It's not a law. It's just saying, hey, we're in favor of this, you know, in principle. Now, if you took that resolution and capitalized on it and proposed an actual statute, an actual regulation, and then held the people who voted for the resolution to vote for the statute, maybe you'd get somewhere. But it's just virtue signaling at this point.
Not surgery. Keep your scalpels off of me.
Lawmakers in 5 states have introduced bills to ban certain procedures until the child is old enough to choose for themselves.
This is really important. First of all, it is only a handful of states. Second, they've introduced resolutions. They haven't actually passed anything. And again, this video is from 7 years ago. As of today, 0 states have any laws on the books doing anything at all about non-medically necessary surgeries on intersex infants. None whatsoever. Texas makes the list because they proposed a bill, but the bill they proposed about doing surgeries on infants bans trans kids from receiving surgeries. The same surgeries that are done non-consensually on intersex kids. The same surgeries that are done to cis kids at the same age as the trans kids. No questions asked. They're banning surgeries, but only for the one group of people who actually needs them and not for the people they're being done to that don't. Super job, Texas. That's Senate Bill 14, which became effective on September 1st, 2023, incidentally, should anybody in Texas want to do anything about that. Several states have introduced resolutions. California did pass SCR 110 in 2018, condemning the practice and urging the medical community to delay surgeries, but nothing legal. Some hospitals have policies, but there's exceptions, like by parental request. What's really frustrating about it is that many states have laws that restrict genital surgery or gender care for children. But every single one of them has carve-out exceptions for religious circumcisions, a religion that the child can't possibly have opted into, by the way, and can definitely be done when the child does make the choice to opt in, if they do make that choice, but never mind. And a carve out for gender normalizing surgeries on intersex infants. So while there are laws, they've gone out of their way to not ban these kinds of procedures. They've gone out of their way to ban the one kind of thing that is the result of bodily autonomy and not ban the other thing that infringes on bodily autonomy. Because we're not actually about bodily autonomy. We don't actually care about what harms children. We just want to control the children. We want to control the people, to tell them who they have to be and how they have to live, and hope that if we make it hard enough for them, either the deviants will just shrug, be miserable, and live with it, or won't live with it. And either way, we won't have to look at them. Free country.
All we're asking, colleagues, is that the person who's being operated on be able to weigh in. It's that simple.
Not all former patients support a ban, though. Some
Right. You don't even necessarily have to arrange it such that a medical board makes a decision that a patient is capable of making, a cognitive choice and can consent or even assent. They just need to be old enough to express what they want. And it can still be up to the doctors and the parents. Even that would be a huge improvement, because while they're probably not going to get it right every time, they're going to get it right a hell of a lot more often than a doctor peeking between the legs, taking out a ruler, and making an incision. At best, that's 50-50. Hello, Mark. Lovely to see you. Mark will be on shortly, in about 20 minutes, local time.
say the surgeries they had as infants saved them from physical pain and emotional distress.
I know Senate Bill 201 would have created additional hardships for me and my family. I know a bill that blocks access to health care assumes every person is the same and discredits mental health would have made my life worse.
See, again, she doesn't know that because we don't have counterfactuals. Now, I get it that a person who finds out they have intersex conditions later in life and looks back and realizes that they could have had a very different childhood. For some people, they might be grateful because it happens to align with the decision they would have made as an adult. But they don't know when you're an infant what you're going to decide later. And so they shouldn't be deciding for you. It's wonderful that it worked out for her, but to make that choice for the people without knowing whether it's going to work out, without making that choice for the kids who would have chosen the other way, it's unforgivable. I mean, I'm sure there's dozens of people like her, but there's dozens of people like me and Pigeon who are pretty freaking angry about what was done to us because we have no idea how different our lives would be if we were left the fuck alone. Or at least asked when we were older and could say.
And the doctors who perform these surgeries have mobilized in opposition. The Societies for Pediatric Urology is lobbying against these proposals, calling them an extraordinary overreach. Vice News spoke with Dr. Beth Drzwecki, who serves on the SPU's Intersex task force.
Pediatric urologists are neither for nor against surgery. We are for the individualized care using a multidisciplinary team to treat the patient and the family.
What would you say to a parent who looks at their intersex child's genitals and says, this doesn't look normal, I just want it to look normal?
I really try and enforce with everybody, patient, family, that everybody has their own normal. And maybe
what does enforce mean in this context? And it's true, everybody does have their own normal. Like, for example, one thing that often crops up in young infants is the urethra is in the wrong place. That isn't even necessarily an intersex thing. It just happens sometimes. And sometimes a pediatric urologist will get brought in to try to fix things. Sometimes it's cosmetic. Like, there are lots of little boys who are born with the urethra, maybe not where you'd expect it to be, maybe in a somewhat inconvenient location. It doesn't have to be where it typically is, but sometimes people feel like the child will grow up feeling weird or out of place if they can't pee standing up like the other kids for some reason. Why adults should be watching them pee standing up is anybody's guess, but sometimes that's a normalization procedure that has nothing to do with being intersex. There's a few different instances like that, but you get the general idea.
help them understand the umbrella of intersex a little bit more closely. In almost all healthcare situations, parents have the best interest of the child at hand when they're making these decisions.
So, for example, you think a parent...
The parents may have the best interest of the child at heart, but that isn't always the case. For a lot of people, the child they perceive as reflection of them. Having a child come out with weird, ambiguous genitals, a little freak, why, there must be something wrong with them. Why, they must have sinned and they're being punished for it, or who the fuck knows what. But also, having the best interests of the child at heart doesn't necessarily mean they have the knowledge to guide them to the best outcomes. Every parent wants the best for their child, but a lot of parents end up circumcising their little boys because they think that's what's best, even though there's no medical reason for that.
It's fully within their rights to have a child's healthy, functional clitoris reduced if they're uncomfortable with how it looks.
I think that that decision is made as a team together about what is going to be in the best interest of the child.
Just ask everyone except the person with the clitoris.
Based on the specific diagnosis for that child.
But sometimes a decision is based on a social idea of what that clitoris should look like, right?
There are situations that support doing that aberration early on, and we do have data that supports that. And therefore, when a family chooses that option, we feel comfortable supporting it. Our understanding of the clitoral.
Far be it from me to do the whole micro expressions thing, but the body language strongly suggested that despite the fact that making statements like that is literally this doctor's job, she was still very uncomfortable just then saying that. Like towing the line and saying, well, we kind of have the evidence, so I'm comfortable supporting that. You know, it was a little sus.
Anatomy of intersex diagnoses overall has dramatically changed, as well as our approach to children who are born intersex.
But the main point that the activists are making is, I didn't choose this for myself.
Historically, there was not very much transparency at all in children who are born intersex. Our goal.
That's true. Very, very few people ever knew they were intersex. A lot of people like me had to find out later in life from weird and unexplained things, and eventually finding their bits and pieces of records from when they were infants and deducing what the hell happened. When the child was made aware, they were told as a child to keep it secret, to tell no one, because you'll be harassed, you'll be bullied, you'll be treated like a freak, and so on and so forth. And that's probably true. Kids can be cruel. And while not every kid is cruel, there's always a few cruel kids around, you know? But sometimes people are the opposite of cruel. Sometimes people react with curiosity and wonder and delight at the beautiful diversity of people around them. I remember being in elementary school, and many of the kids in my classes in kindergarten and first grade were meeting a Black student for the first time. They'd never seen a Black person before. And some people reacted with revulsion. Holy crap, what's wrong with you? Why are you a weird color? And other kids reacted with curiosity and wonder. They were like, wow, I didn't know people came in chocolate. Because kids. I was much more interested in the reactions of my classmates than in the fact that the Black students were Black. Speaking of gratitude, I'm grateful for Jester, who sends a $5 super chat. Thank you, Jester. And says, my narcissists and non-diagnostic, I mean parents, promise they have my best interest in mind. And that means they do, right? It's an easy thing to say, but taking a person's word for it may not necessarily be in the best interest of the child. Just saying.
Now is to really talk to the families, make sure that they understand the decisions that they're making. And furthermore, we also disclose this information to the children along the way with age-appropriate information. Legislation that prohibits healthcare options for all patients or generalizes medical care for everyone poses a disservice and possible harm for some children who may benefit.
So that is an interesting distinction, because at first she says, well, you know, we don't really oppose or affirm surgery. We're kind of neutral on it. But now she's saying, well, we can't ban the harmful procedures because it restricts parents' choices, even though they're harmful to the child. That's an interesting take, because she is presenting a definitive political position on this specific subject. That's very interesting. No, it's not removing necessary health care from the kids who need it, because every single proposal that's ever been made specifically states only medically unnecessary cosmetic procedures need to be banned. And even then, they're only banned on infants. Most of the wording, like with the Victoria law that we were reading earlier, delays the decisions of whether to operate and how until later. It doesn't say never. It just says let the child have a say about what happens to their own body. People often ask me, why, Ember, is the intersex flag so different from all the other pride flags? Why is it a yellow field with a purple circle? What is up with that? Well, of course, because the colors are complementary and purple is amazing, but that's not the symbology. That's just the color choice. The reason it's a circle is to represent wholeness, unbrokenness, body integrity, bodily autonomy, which is a thing that every single person on this flag believes in, at least as long as they believe in the whole community. There are some exceptions, but that's neither here nor there. Everyone should have the right to determine what happens to their own body, because if you don't own your own body, how can you possibly own anything or be said to have any rights at all? It has to be fundamental, and it has to be insisted upon, because there are political forces trying to take it away from everyone. And if you can undermine it anywhere, you can undermine it in other areas too. That's why so many of us fight for pro-choice, even though we ourselves may not choose abortion. The choice has to be up to the people, not the government. And while it seems like this is the opposite situation, where we're saying you have to use the government to take choices away from the families of infants, what we're actually saying is the infant deserves to have that choice, not other people making it for them.
From the surgery.
Other urologists are now breaking ranks and speaking out in favor of legislation. Dr. Barbara Chubak is an adult urologist at Mount Sinai Hospital in New York.
Who ultimately should have the choice for these surgeries? The child or the parents of the child?
To the extent to which it is safe, the decision should go to the child whenever he, she, they are old enough, thoughtful enough, empowered enough to make that choice.
So do you think decisions about some surgeries should just be taken away from the parents entirely?
I reluctantly say yes, I do.
Why?
I fear that out of fear or out of a desire for their children to conform to their own ideal vision, parents are, with the best intentions, seriously restricting their children's autonomy in ways that are irreversible.
As a doctor,
autonomy is the central argument, but it's not just autonomy. Like with Pigeon, whose gonads were removed as an infant, it's not just restricting autonomy, it's restricting potential. In lots of cases, it's more than ambiguous genitals, it's ambiguous reproductive systems. In some cases, like mine, there's multiple reproductive systems. Making choices like this can close off one, remove it entirely, or make it very difficult to access. And that's making more choices than just the phenotypic presentation of the child's body. It's making choices about what they're physically capable of doing. It's like saying if you had a culture where you believed that people had to be left-handed, that's your culture, and people were born with right-handedness, the solution should be to cut off their right hand to make them conform. Now, that would be obviously ridiculous, but it's not significantly different from what we're talking about, because we're cutting off parts of people's bodies and changing the entire trajectory of their lives to try to force them to conform for their own good. And that's pretty fucked up.
are you okay with the government saying you cannot perform this procedure on a patient?
You're getting at, do I support the bill in California? As a doctor, I would say that I reluctantly support the bill. I really don't think that anyone really wants government legislation to be inserted into the doctor-patient relationship. The trouble is that since the 1990s, urologists have consistently failed to address the very valid concerns raised by activist patients and their families. We have collectively.
Well, it's not just that they failed to address the concerns. It's that there's a fundamental difference between these two positions. We're saying we need to stop non-consensual surgeries on infants for the same reason we're saying we need to allow consensual surgeries on trans teens. Because in both cases, it should be up to the person whose body it is, not other people, not the government dictating what they should do, not their parents dictating what they should do, and certainly not doctors who may not even be talking to their parents about what should be done, as if my parents are to be believed is what happened in my case. It's almost like the United States, the freest country that God ever gave man, is founded on the principle of anybody but you gets to decide what happens to you. You don't choose your own life. You do as you're told. And if you do good, maybe you'll get to choose for other people. But it's not just the United States. We're just, you might say, the worst example, at least in the Western world. And yes, I'm aware of the things that are done to infants in the Middle East and other parts of the world. That's not what we're talking about. I'm not saying those things are okay. That's not the issue. What I'm saying is that this thing that is being done to people like me is very much not okay. Mark says, silly Ember, the US was founded on Jeebus. So I've been told. I have yet to see the evidence of that claim. But say lovey. Alrighty, folks. There's only a couple seconds left in the video. You know what? Let's see if we can finish it.
Failed to permit a voice to those who, despite our very best intentions, have been hurt by us. The chief and cardinal tenet of medicine is first do no harm. We have evidence of harm. We need to step away from that.
Bam. That's exactly it right there. All these organizations, including ones called Do No Harm, which is an SPLC designated hate group, by the way, seem hell-bent on doing the maximum amount of harm. They want to chop up the intersex babies to make them look normal so they can pretend this binary they insist upon actually exists. But at the same time, they won't allow the same thing for trans kids who actually need that health care in order to minimize harm. It's upside down town up in here. As one by Lance says, we're the worst example. Official motto of the USA. We may as well put it on our money at this point. Say lovey. In any case, thank you all so much for being here. Thank you for watching. This is a very important topic. It's personal to me, but it's important for more than just me. Intersex people don't have a very loud voice. We're a curiosity in most parts of the internet where we get any attention at all. We're overshadowed by the political rhetoric targeting trans people, which many of us, myself included, also are, because we need trans care to reverse what was done to us as infants. So thank you for being here for this. Thank you for pushing the buttons. Share if you can. If you have somewhere where it might do some good or some bigots it might piss off, do use that share button. If the YouTube is working correctly, this will take you over to Mark's stream, where there's going to be a much more chill time. Our good friend Mark Reed, who's over here for debate reviews every other weekend. He's doing a Reddit morality judgment thing. What could possibly go wrong? So do join us for that. And as always, remember, you don't have to do things to infants without their consent in the service of some arbitrary normalcy that doesn't even mean anything, because you are better than religion. We'll see you tomorrow. Thanks to all our patrons and top-level members for November. Miranda, Karen Butcher, Jessica the Transmetal Alchemist, Robin Webster, Maya Adkisson, Jimmy Tux, Ian Chen, Lilith, Ember Lynn, The Barely Bearable Atheist, Eric Wander, Jason Jacoby, Godless Engineer, Jester, Lil of All Trades, Deviant Outcast, Kelly King, the Detroit Atheist Queen, The Mighty Filbert, and Secular Phalanist. And you can add your name here next month by signing up at patreon.com/betterthanember, or by joining Emberships here on YouTube at the Cinder level, which also includes all the custom emojis, tons of member-exclusive content, member-only live streams, and a bunch of other stuff. I deeply appreciate all the supporters who keep this channel going. Thank you all so much. Because of you, we're building a wonderful community that I'm very proud of.
Just like a spark that spreads